Greetings once again, my friends, and welcome back to the Geek News Podcast, at least for a short podcast today, because there's been an announcement that I know that some people on YouTube have had, but the RSS feed has not been able to get this opportunity. So I am putting this podcast out not only because I feel that it deserves to be on the RSS feed and I want to be able to let people in on what's going on, but also to be able to basically speak on the future of the podcast because uh, even though this was supposed to come out last month, unfortunately, I wasn't able to make that work because of the holidays and work and everything like that. But in case you haven't heard the announcement today, Stephen Romney of Studio Ghost Utah, or not today, but over the last month, Stephen Romney of Studio Ghost Utah unfortunately has to leave the Geek News podcast. And before I know that we're going to get some people who are going to want to stir the shit and say like this is the total drama thing because everything on the internet is drama, right? Everything is. I'm here to tell you that it isn't. I know that Romney wanted me to kind of keep things somewhat secretive or at least somewhat professional, but I think I've edited things down enough in my head to be able to properly say what happened. For those who don't know, who have not been able to listen to the podcast regularly, especially in 2021, if you want to call that regular, uh, Romney was working at a TV station in Salt Lake City, and so at that point, thankfully, he was able to get that job, and he was able to do story research for them as well as be able to kind of be a a crew member of the studio. And so at that point, he did his job very, very well. As you guys might expect, when Romney does something, he commits to it and he gives his all. And so that's actually one of the things that I've really personally admired in him is that it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to get that going. Whereas in my old age, I'm starting to have that moment where I have to get a little motivated in order to do it. So, and I apologize, I'm drinking because, it's winter and dry mouth and all that crap. So the problem is that Romney had the audacity to be a good worker, a very good worker. And when I say like he is a good worker, I mean, I only dealt with him in a podcast and a friend context, but I can tell you that he is a hard worker. And because of the audacity of him to be such a hard worker, well, he got promoted over at work. And unfortunately, the promotion at work now makes it so that Romney is not able to do the podcast, and he has like basically this was kind of a point of no return. If he gets this promotion, he has to commit to the TV studio that he works for, the new studio that he works for. So at that point, that's sad, and uh, ultimately, we'll get into why that's sad for me. But he did make the decision that he wanted to pursue this, and he wanted to go and pursue more of a journalism aspect of his career. And at that point, a lot of people don't think this, but he got my blessing on the matter. He didn't need it, but he got it because both me and Andrea, as well as Alex, understand that like this is a great opportunity for him and it allows for him to be able to grow. And so we feel like this is something that he has to take advantage of. So it wasn't that difficult of a decision to say, this sucks, and we're gonna miss you, but you need to go do this. Because we love you and we know that this would be nothing but the best for you. So he has taken that opportunity. I know that he's put out some videos since then, basically his um what he's learned in 2021. And you guys can check that out. But he's also made it kind of clear that because of the new job, he can't do that much on that channel either. Basically, any side projects that he does in his spare time, that's what goes there. Like he can't go and be a critic like he used to be. So I can tell you for a fact that I'm going to miss that, and I'm also going to miss the wealth of information that he can provide when it comes to the creative professions. But this is a worthwhile endeavor for him. And so at that point, I'm proud of him. I think that this is going to be a great opportunity for him, and I wish him nothing but the best. And I've already kind of said this to him in the background, and I'll say it here. Like, I'm gonna miss him. He has been such a good friend to me over the many years, as well as he's been such a loyal person to be able to have on the podcast. When we have a lot of those last minute cancellations, unfortunately, I want to say like 75-80% of them are mine. And it's simply because I have family shit come up. I have other stuff, other adult things that require my attention. I have kid issues. I'm sick. I hurt myself working. A lot of 2021 is basically work, kind of creating its own issues. And so that's sad. But Romney always took it from the context of, dude, there's always next week. And so I always appreciated him for that, and I've always applauded his patience when it comes to dealing with me, as well as being able to put out something with quality, because he has the patience to be able to give his all to that product. And so I actually feel kind of jealous for the TV studio that's going to get him, because they are going to get a much more quality product from him. And so that's both awesome for that TV studio, as well as it sucks because I liked having it on the podcast. Um, in the meantime, though, I've always felt like if somebody has to leave a podcast, they deserve a what I like to call a gold watch episode. Where basically, we kind of go over some of the positives of what this person has been able to do for the podcast. And I always regretted the fact that I could never do one for Aldo Gomez, who also left the podcast about a few years earlier than this. And he also left because of pursuing career opportunities. And I always kind of regretted not giving an Aldo's Gold Watch episode, but Romney definitely deserved one. And so even though it's a month late and I don't care, it's actually technically 2 months late, I don't care. I'm giving it to him. And at that point, I just want to share like a couple of stories that I have of him that I will always treasure. And I'm always like, I make it sound like this is the end and I'm never going to see him again. And I've texted him since then, but this is definitely a part of my life that he's no longer a part of. And that's what I'm missing, is I always looked forward to being able to catch up with him for the podcast and being able to have him come on at the most awkward times. That's all great. But I did want to share a couple of awesome stories of him, and one of the reasons that I've liked having him on the podcast for so long. So the first one that I want to tell is back in 2014 when I had retooled my Evening of Geekery podcast into what is Geek News Today. Because I knew that I could do solo, but it would be much better if I had a panel to be able to bounce off of, and it took months to be able to get that going. And I had a magical moment where I was also doing a journalism class, and I was behind in it because I didn't necessarily write the way that my professor wanted me to. Yet another professor where him and me had a lot of disagreements, but since I was already doing work, I was already the promotions director at the radio station for the time. I was already in the news station or the newspaper area, um, doing my own work. And since there was some extra credit going on, I decided, I'm just gonna go grab that and just get it out of the way. And I actually was able to sit in on a news meeting, and I got to meet Aldo and Romney for the first time. And I'd heard their names, I'd read them because I'd seen some of the game reviews that Aldo had done for like Pokemon X and Y. And then Romney, I had seen one of his movie reviews. I can't remember which one off the top of my head. Um, Crap, but it might have been Susie, or the one that we're not allowed to mention with Romney, because it's the Scarlett Johansson movie where it's very inaccurate in its science. I'll have to go look that term up, but we got into that, and we actually got into a conversation before the meeting even started about Castlevania. I don't even know how it got brought up, but they were talking games, and all of a sudden Castlevania came up, and this was around the time when I had played Lords of Shadow for the first time, and I was really starved for some Castlevania. And so at that point, I joined in the conversation, and we hit it off. It was a podcast before the podcast, and immediately, as soon as that conversation was done, like we got so in depth. The person who was running the meeting was about to kick us out because we were talking so much about that stuff that they couldn't focus on what was going on with the newspaper. And at that point, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt I needed to have both of these guys, because I could talk games with Aldo, and I could bring up like I could talk games with Romney as well, but I could bring him on for film commentary, and that would be the amazing thing because I've always approached things that I literally am not the smartest guy in the room. And that's why I go to other people. And that's why I have the humility to go and ask questions. And these were two people that I could ask those questions of. And so that's how I knew that I wanted to be able to have them on. And I was so scared to ask them. It took me the better part of a month to ask Aldo because I knew him, but I started to get to know him after that, in the best way that I know possible. I am very socially awkward, and part of it is because of my abrasive personality. Because I don't want to forsake that. I think it's actually a worthwhile thing to have, but at the same time, I don't want to push people away. And especially with Aldo, like I knew that this was gonna work, and all of a sudden, like he was, I can't remember what article he was writing, but this was when he was branching out a little bit. He was doing articles as well as reviews, and he was trying to get inspiration. So he dug out his tablet or his phone and watched Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood in the news station. They don't care as long as you get the stuff done. And so at that point, I struck up a conversation because he was watching one of my favorite episodes out of it. I think it was Father Before the Grave. Um, and so I struck up a conversation with him again because I had to wait for a bunch of radio students that were never going to come to get their practicum or to get extra credit. And that's when I asked him, and he was just like, "Dude, I'd totally do that." And so I was very thankful at that point. I even remember shedding a manly tear afterwards because that was so hard to do for me. Because I'm just not that social, and when I am social and when I get abrasive, um, I'm always worried that people are going to take it the wrong way, especially in this day and age when like you give just the slightest amount of criticism and people will walk away very quickly. Romney came 2 weeks later, and that one was super hard because Romney was not in the radio station or in the newspaper area that much. He was off doing animation classes, and so he was very hard to get a hold of. And once I saw him and I knew he was on his way out, like I knew this was a now or never moment, and I immediately kind of pulled him aside and reminded him of who I was. He's like, "Yeah, I remember you." Um, and I immediately asked him if he would like to be able to do the podcast. And I think he was kind of uncertain about it because of how busy his schedule was, but he liked the opportunity. And so at that point, I got his email and immediately said, "Okay, well, let's record this day. You don't have classes going on at that point, right?" He's like, no, but if anything changes, I'll let you know," kind of thing. He was kind of the uncertain one, in my opinion. Aldo was set. Aldo really enjoyed the idea, but I don't like. I always kind of got that impression that maybe Romney wasn't entirely bought yet, and maybe that was because he was in so many classes at the time because he wanted to get graduated. He just didn't know. He just didn't know what he could commit to and what he couldn't. And I promise the reason that I'm getting to this is because I want to tell another story, which is the first podcast that we ever did, and it was fun, but Romney wasn't there. Um, and this is actually one of the reasons why I knew I had to keep Romney on the podcast. So I set up the day, and it was a nerve-wracking day because we had to do we because I was a second year radio student. So at that point, I couldn't just get times whenever. I actually had to go and get times that were more ideal, especially since now I had to go to they had redesigned the media center at Salt Lake City's campus of Salt Lake Community College. And so originally we were off in the main campus, which is called the Redwood campus. And so that was closer to me, and it was easier to be able to do the evening of geekery that way. But now, since everything media related was being moved to that South Salt Lake campus, it was a longer travel time. And I knew that if I'm going to do this, I have to basically kind of merge it all together so that I can get classes done as well as my radio work done. And so I worked out a time, and thankfully, everybody committed to it. Aldo was excited, and so was Romney. And of course, the first thing that came to my mind was I was totally nervous that they weren't going to show up and this was going to be all for nothing. And Aldo showed up, and that immediately kind of put me back on more in a comfortable area. But Romney didn't show up, and I'm just like, well, maybe he just decided that this wasn't going to work out and he didn't want to invest in it. And so I hate to say this, Romney, but I kind of wrote you off because I already wasn't sure if this was going to be something that you wanted to be a part of, but at the same time I'm just like, well, maybe he just kind of looked at this as not worth the effort. Um and so at that point I did the episode, and we mentioned Romney quite a bit because we wanted to have him on there. But we did our episodes, we did our stories. It was a fun experience with just me and Aldo, and we wrapped. And immediately I texted. I probably shouldn't have done this because I was kind of angry at the time because I'm just like, well, this was such a great podcast. This would have been so much better if he was here. And so I texted him like, everything okay? Were you just not able to make it? And Romney actually texted me back going, wait, was that today? And I was like, part of me was kind of angry, because this is my podcast. I've been working so hard to retool it. And so I'm like, yeah, it was today. And he immediately apologizes for it. And he's just like, no, I actually I think he said he was taking a nap or something like that, or he was getting lunch. Um, and so he felt really bad. And at that point, I knew like this wasn't just a passing interest for Romney. He was very interested in doing this podcast, and I wanted to keep him on. Like at that point, I knew, especially after the second podcast when we had all three of our members there and we did it, and this was before Alex's time, and we were having such a fun time that I knew that this was gonna go somewhere. And so like I want to be able to tell that story, and then also just a lot of the really cool moments that Romney has also been able to contribute. I still remember that first Christmas when we had done a whole year, like a whole year of the podcast, and the radio staff let us continue into the summer and into the winter break. And that was actually really cool. And I was so happy with where the podcast was. And Alex was part of it at this point, but he was kind of a passing uh, interest that at the time Aldo was really pushing to have on as a regular because I think Aldo really liked the idea of pushing Alex out of his shell, and he's always been a very shy guy. And so Aldo kind of went challenge accepted and went off in that direction. But I remember I wanted to thank them dearly because they had been part of something that was very difficult for me. And this was also the year that my dad passed away. And so I was already kind of dealing with grief on top of that, and the holidays didn't really help that. But I decided, I had the cash to be able to do it, so I wanted to send gift cards to each of the panelists because I wanted to show how thankful I was that they were a part of this, because I know that they don't have to be, and I'm just so happy to have them there. And so I think they were $60 gift cards each because I could afford it at the time. And I sent them out, and I remember Romney was like the other two were accepted, and I met with them later and like, oh man, that's so cool, thank you. And we also just kind of called that Alex's Christmas present a little bit just because even though his sister got something on behalf of me and her, I got him the $60 gift card and he used that, and that was a good moment. But I remember Alda or Romney sent an email just afterwards, and he just wanted to gently remind, like he wanted to gently remind that yes, this was fun for them, but to not neglect the efforts that I had put into it in getting it together. And I that was a really encouraging statement for me at the time, considering that in my mind everything was falling apart because I didn't know if I was actually going to be able to carry on as an adult without my dad there. And that was actually one of those things that was very encouraging to me because it did remind me, I did make this podcast, and I tirelessly worked on agendas and being able to pick stuff that would complement Romney as well as Alex and even Aldo to an extent, and that was always a big deal to me. I still have that email, and it's a little thing, but it's the little things that really help out, and it's one of those things that endeared Romney to me as a friend, um, as well as a co-host kind of thing. Um, so I have no problem saying I'm gonna miss him. And I know that he's not going anywhere. I know that, and I will still be able to text him. Him and me have been texting about the Steam Deck getting delayed, and we're both really pissed about that. Um, just because we want to have the Steam Deck, like we both have such unique things that we want to do with it, and I'm gonna miss a lot of that with him. And I always looked forward that I get to see Alex a lot, so this is nothing against Alex. But I looked forward each time we did a podcast to when Romney was going to make it. And when he actually had family issues come up, I kept him in my thoughts because I knew that he was, I was going to miss having him there, but I knew that it would work out um, for him. And I don't know, maybe there's a brotherly kind of thing too because he was the youngest of the podcast, and I always, we teased him for that, but holy crap, it never came across. I still remember a comment we got back where somebody actually said, he might as well be our age because of the amount of information that he knew, um, given that he just loves learning stuff about the creative profession. Um, I'm gonna miss him. I'm gonna miss being able to have conversations with him that maybe weren't the easiest to have, especially during this difficult time where fandom and politics is bleeding together so hard, um because him and me were having conversations that need to be had in the mainstream uh town square, and him and me were having it. We didn't agree politically. I have no problem saying that. Like he was on I think he was basically, I might be wrong about this and Romney can correct it, but he was kind of center left. He always approached stories the way of, okay, here are the facts as I know it. I'm going to go do my homework on it, and then I'm going to formulate an opinion, which is kind of how I do it as well. And I always kind of looked at him in that regard as like center left because he also was creative, and he didn't see a reason to not push certain things. Uh, but I also appreciated when him and me had our first political discussion via Twitter, and I believe that was January 6th. When I was defending the January 6th protests, because and I still defend them, not for the reasons that people might think, but I really don't think it took that much to have that happen. In fact, yeah, I'm kind of surprised that things weren't worse than they were that day because the politicians that have literally parked in their seats for years upon years have been asking for this for quite a while, simply because they love rubbing the fact that they have power in those who do not have power's faces. They are exactly who should not be in those positions of power, whether they be Republican or Democrat. And both me and Romney agreed on that, and we both agreed that it was a powder keg waiting to happen. It's just unfortunate the way that it happened. So I appreciated that. I also appreciated that. Um, I tend to get a little bit more. And I try very hard not to do this. I tend to get very emotional near the end of an argument, where I shouldn't do this, but I take arguments personally. Um, And so that's usually a point where I kind of look at it and I go, I got to stop here, because at this point I'm going to explode, and it's not going to end well. This, when I explode, bridges get burned, kind of thing. And I appreciated Romney when, after we had our discussion, and even though we both agreed like we weren't going to go anywhere and there were going to be people you were never going to convince, he still said, you know what, I value our friendship enough to not take this farther. And I appreciated him for that too. And this is why I'm gonna miss him. Like, I loved having those creative conversations. I loved being able to theory craft with him. And this is what Warner Brothers needs to do with Harry Potter, not necessarily what they're doing. Um, and I will always treasure having those conversations, especially when it came to Romney's War. And I kind of wish that we could bring him back when the Mario movie comes out, just to see if I'm right or wrong or anything like that. But I'm definitely gonna miss the guy, and I'm betting there's a lot of people that are gonna miss him. I know that there are a few people that have been new to the audience that have wanted to just sit back and call him a libtard, and to that, I would just say to you guys, you don't understand why it worked. Um, because at the end of the day, like, whether you're left leaning, whether you're right leaning, eventually we have to all pick up the pieces. And I'm willing to have that culture war. I have no problem doing it, but I also know at the end of the day, the pieces have to be picked up. The messes have to be cleaned, and that we have to learn to coexist again. And that's why I was willing to have those conversations with Romney. And I knew that I was gonna win hearts and minds. I've never approached it from the angle of I need to win hearts and minds. I've always just said this is who I am. And I think Romney understood that. And so at that point, I really wish you could see past that with him. Is that, yes, he was somebody who thought that I Am Not Starfire deserved more credit than it got. And while I disagree with him on it, I do honestly vehemently disagree. I think it was a very lackluster effort on that author's part, but I do agree with him in the concept that eventually, like, once the dust has settled, you know, we have to actually like try to get these woke authors, these woke writers, to understand why that doesn't work, and then try to explain to them, so that, because some of them actually do have the potential to be good writers. Some of them have long since exhausted that potential, and some of them just aren't very creative. I'm willing enough to admit that. But we have to be able to actually kind of push that forward and say, look, I get that you want to be able to do this, but here's why it doesn't work, because they can't learn and grow unless we're actually willing to give that criticism to them either, even if they're not willing to accept it. That criticism has to be given. And so at that point, like, I understand that some people didn't agree with him on that and didn't like the fact that he pushed in one of his recommendations, I Am Not Starfire. And you can have that. And that's totally fine. I didn't agree with him either. I still put up the thing in the RSS feed, I think, but I didn't agree with him either. I don't think I Am Not Starfire is a good book, but he had the right to be able to do it. That was his portion of the podcast. I like, what am I gonna do? He created it, and it was working and people liked it. I'm not gonna stop that just because a bunch of people don't like it, but a bunch of other people do. That would be the wrong way to go for that. So at that point, I'm gonna miss him, and I wish nothing but the best for him. But I am gonna miss getting on to the pre-show, whether it's live or not, and being able to just say, "How you doing, man?" And it's just one of those things where a friendship has to learn and grow, and this is gonna be where that friendship kind of goes. But what does that mean for the future of the podcast? Now, I have already been considering some of this, but because of the holidays and because of my work and how busy it is, I can't answer that right now because I've got too many things going on in my head. I've got kids to manage. I've got right now Andrea's sick, so I've got to help her out. I've got work to be able to do. I've got cleaning around the house that needs to be done. My card's full at the moment is basically what I'm saying. And so what I'm basically saying at the moment is if I were to end this podcast, given that Romney has left, I think Romney would probably kick me in the balls for doing that, because I know that he always believed in what the podcast could do. And so I think it's only appropriate that the show go on without him. And I will miss him just as much as I miss Aldo. Um, you know, Alex is still here, but if he ever left, I would miss him too. I see him a lot more regularly, but I would, because I do like having the conversations with Alex as well. So the show will go on. I have made that clear, but 2021 has also taught me a lot of lessons in regards to the fact that, well, I love doing this. It's not a financial gain right now. And in the last couple of years, I have had to get a job again, and be able to earn some money around the house, and being able to help around the house. And that's been an essential thing. I can't devote as much time creatively as I could in the past, because it's just not fair. It's not fair to my wife. It's not fair to me. It's not fair to my kids. And so at that point, there are going to have to be changes to accommodate that schedule, that I just didn't do in 2021. And so right now, all I'm willing to say is that the show will go on, but changes will have to be made, and the final decisions on this actually will be being made later this month, because I'm going to be busy until I think mid-January is how long the return kind of season for Amazon lasts. And so at that point, as soon as that is done and I can devote the time that I want to devote to be able to talk about this, I will devote it, and we will figure things out. But the show will go on. I think that if I didn't do that, Romney would kick me in the balls, because of all the hard work that he invested into it, all the hard work that Aldo invested into it. So it's only appropriate that we continue the Geek News podcast, not just for ourselves, but also for you guys who literally come home at the end of the day on a Monday or even a Friday, crack up at a cold one, and just don't want to talk about what the R's and D's are doing about your given fandom, that's pissing you off, and you're so sick and tired of current events, you just want to talk about what new game is coming. What new awesome movie do you have to look forward to? What is coming up in E3? And so at that point, we're going to continue to deliver it to you. And that's pretty much it. Romney, we salute you. We wish you nothing but the best in your future endeavors. I look forward to seeing what you're going to be able to pull off locally in this new position. But here, my friend, is your gold watch, and you will be missed. But thank you guys so much for joining me on this. When I come back, I do have a couple of other podcasts that I want to be able to do for YouTube as well as for the RSS feed, including wishing you all a happy holidays, because I wasn't able to do that. So you guys can look forward to that very soon. Until then, take care, my friends, and have a good one.